where have you expatriated to?
Well, I spent 2 years in West Africa in the Gambia as a Peace Corps volunteer. That was from 2012 to 2014. And then I spent a year in England. That's where I went to grad school to actually get my master's degree in field archaeology. So that was kind of sort of like the beginning of my archaeological journey. And that was the 2015 and the 2016 academic year. So it was just a 1 year master's program that I spent over there. And that was like the one place that I lived where by the time my time there was finished, I wasn't really quite ready to leave. I lived in a lot of places throughout my adult life, and England was one of those places that I wasn't really quite ready to leave. I just loved living there. There was like the city I lived in was about 2,000 years old,
Whoa.
and I had my CrossFit box. I did Krav Maga on Mondays. I had my go-to shops, my go-to sandwich shop, and I just felt so at home there. So it was tough living. But yes, those were my two places that I've lived abroad, West Africa and England.
Got you. And so you said the city was 2000 years old? Was
That's
this
right.
like kind of like out in the countryside or where in England were you?
It was the north of England. Yorkshire is the county. They have counties there. And York was the city that I lived in. It was originally founded by the Romans, so
Mhm.
roughly about 2,000 years old. And then a while later, it was taken over by the Vikings, and the Vikings named the city Jorvik, which eventually got translated into York. I believe that was in the Middle Ages when it became York. The history of the UK is so vast. So there's so much of it that I missed out on during my single academic year living there. But yeah, it's just that's how old the city was. And like, if you were to go there, the city center, the Roman walls where the old city used to be, they're still standing in the perimeter of the city center, and you can actually like walk on them and like look inward, and you can see some of the changes over time. You're on the Roman walls, but then you can see like the medieval Gothic cathedral, York Minster there and everything. So it's just amazing how centuries of development throughout that city is still remaining and you can see it all. It was incredible.
That is pretty cool. Was there any like Viking stuff there too?
There was a Viking museum that I went there. I don't know what the status of is it is right now, but it was kind of like underneath the city a little bit, and they actually had like some of the old like foundations of some old Viking structures that were still there. They had it like covered with like plexiglass so you can see them. But unfortunately, there was a really nasty flood while I was living over there, and a lot of it got ruined,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And I think it took about like a year and a half to maybe 2 years for them to open back up again. But of course, I had long left by then. But yeah, so there is definitely a lot of history and archaeology related to the Vikings that's intact in that city.
What is your like dream archaeological site to investigate?
Oh goodness. Well, unfortunately, I feel like I was kind of born in the wrong era, Jeff. I mean, like, I did a short production on the discovery of King Tut's tomb over 100 years ago, and of course, that was like one of the most intact tomb that was ever found in the Valley of the Kings. And the consensus at the time was that all the tombs throughout the Valley of the Kings had already been cleared and cataloged and excavated and everything like that. And then they came across this tomb and it had more artifacts than like any other tomb in the valley. And it took like 10 years to catalog everything. And that's where like that solid gold portrait mask that a lot of people think of, like when they hear like the term mummy or they think of King Tut, that's what a lot of people come to mind. That was in King Tut's tomb. So unfortunately, I missed out on all that. Of course, back then, ethics and we're a little bit different. I think a lot of people would attribute to the olden days of archaeology as more like looting than anything else than it is today. But I guess to get back to your question, though, is I really would kind of like to maybe do something in the realms of
Oh, you
underwater archaeology, perhaps like a ship that maybe hasn't been discovered yet. If I could find like a sunken ship somewhere and find anything that was aboard a lost ship, I think that would be kind of more what it would pique my interest because I am a certified scuba diver after all.
Oh yeah. Sorry, we my internet froze up a little bit, so I lost the beginning of what you were saying. But you were saying checking out sunken ships.
Perhaps, yes. I am a certified scuba diver, and I do have my shipwreck diving endorsement. And I've done a couple of shipwrecks in Lake Superior, which is my home state is Michigan, and that's where I learned how to do shipwreck dives. And we've been going to the water for about 40,000 years. That's about how far back boating technology dates. So if you think about 40,000 years of us taking to the seas, it's hard to say just how many shipwrecks are laying at the bottom of our oceans right now because the oceans are very much a mystery to us. Like we've mapped the surface of the moon better than we've mapped our ocean floors at this point.
Wow.
So it's really kind of hard to say what's down there. And then also, when you look at the oceans in general, let's just talk about the Pacific Ocean alone here. The surface area of the Pacific Ocean is so vast and so large that we can fit every single continent on the surface and still have room to spare. And not to mention, you got the Atlantic, the Indian, and our other oceans as well. So it always kind of just piques my curiosity, Jeff. It's just what else is out there, and I think that was one of the things that drew me to the field of archaeology. Was I'm just curious. I think we're all just curious by nature, and so I think maybe archaeology was sort of kind of my way of being on the hunt, being on the pursuit, the search, and everything like that.
Yeah, and isn't it true that they found like whale bones in I think like the Sahara Desert or something? Like many thousands of year old whale bone fossils? You know anything about that?
I don't know about anything of that specifically, though it wouldn't surprise me when you think about just how high like sea levels were like tens of thousands of years ago. Like I actually did some archaeological field work in northern Texas, like northeast of Dallas, and I was actually finding like shark teeth like in the
Whoa.
ground, like way up there. So it always begs the question, like why on earth would shark teeth be 400 miles away from the bay, right? But
Hmm.
yeah, lo and behold, it was up there. And even in like places like South Dakota, you know, you had sea levels that were so high that they even covered much of the Dakotas too. And some of the cave systems there, if you look at Wind Cave National Park, they have this really interesting feature called boxwork. And what would happen is that the salt water way back then would seep down into the ground and it would slowly fill up the cracks of rocks like inside the cave, but eventually, like, you know, the salt would harden and kind of crystallize and expand, and the rocks would break off along like the hardened salt, and you'd only have like the hardened salt remained. It kind of looked like, well, boxes, I guess you can say, like boxes of hardened sea salt. And it's only one of few places in the world where that phenomenon exists. And unfortunately, like a lot of that has been destroyed through like looting and plundering throughout, like since the discovery of the cave. But unfortunately, that's a phenomenon that will never happen again. Like we're never going to have an instance where the sea levels will be that high to like fill in these cave systems to create that again. So I guess I wouldn't be surprised at all that, you know, whale bones would be found in like these dry desert places in places like Africa. It makes sense when you look at some of the other evidence.
Yeah. Now, you said that things like this will never happen again. Don't you think it could be possible that in like thousands of years, the like the ice caps could melt and then there could be more sea levels, like even like, way beyond our time, obviously. Don't couldn't it be possible that there's like cycles that the earth goes through and the sea could be super vast sometimes and maybe more shallow sometimes?
Yeah, it's really kind of hard to say. You know, it's just and I will admit that, you know, geology isn't exactly like my area of expertise. I mean, there is some overlap with what I do in archaeology, of course. Now, when I say archaeology, you know, a lot of people get the idea that, oh, you're digging up dinosaur bones and stuff like that, which there could be some crossover to that for sure, but it's mostly paleontologists that handle fossils and dinosaur bones. What I focus on as an archaeologist is material remains that were left behind by people. So we're
Mm.
talking like, you know, stone tools, you know, arrowheads, other materials that people would have left behind and everything like that. So there is some crossover because I do have to focus on some geology in my line of work, but not quite to the extent, you know, in which you and I are discussing. But what I will say is that, you know, obviously the Earth has always kind of gone through cycles. Like if you want to go back to when the Earth had begun, you know, some people would theorize that the Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. And you know, I don't know if people can really kind of grasp just how high of a number that actually is. Like if you want to look on this at the scale of time, a million seconds is 12 days. A billion seconds is 34 years. So, and then if you want to go up to a trillion seconds, that's over 20,000, 23,000 years. So
Yeah.
it's just when we're talking about a billions of years, the amount of time that is actually just insane when you look at it that way. So, so I think, yeah, perhaps maybe it could be possible. Now, as to the rate that that will occur, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, some people will theorize that'll happen faster than we might think. Some people think that, okay, well, if it does happen, it's just that's probably going to be like eons down the road. Some people think like we won't even make it that far. We're going to have like a massive solar flare event, and the whole Earth is going to be fried, or we're going to have another mass extinction event like an asteroid that killed all the dinosaurs. So it's really kind of hard to say. But of course, I think that's going to be well beyond our scope of worry, I would
Yeah.
say.
Do you have an opinion about so like the asteroid that knocked out the dinosaurs? I've heard a lot of people say that it struck somewhere around like the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. And I'm curious if you have any opinions about that because I've also heard people say that it was more of like a cascade of events. Like there was an asteroid here, but also like some kind of virus somewhere else in the world, and then like another thing happening somewhere else in the world, and like the sort of full spectrum of catastrophes is what caused the extinction event. Do you have any like opinion or professional archaeological opinion about that stuff?
Well, it seems like depending on like I guess like the size of the asteroid, it's just like I feel like you would get like a huge cataclysmic event like in the area of impact, I'm sure. But then I'm sure an event like that, if it doesn't like spread, like just like blow up the entire world, if you will, it would surely have like a lot of cascading effects that would lead to a lot of like just like turmoil and disruption around the world too. Like when Mount what is the name of the mountain? I can't remember, but it was back in like the 19th century, so the 1800s. There was a huge volcanic eruption in
I'm
Indonesia.
I'm just gonna guess. I could be wrong. Was it like Vesuvius?
No, not Vesuvius. I don't think it was Krakatoa either. I'll have to look it up, but it like totally disrupted like weather patterns like around the world too. Like so many places, like especially like in Europe, just received like rain constantly for like months on end. Like it was always cloudy, it was always raining. And I remember this is how the story of Frankenstein came to be, where Mary Shelley and her husband were in the UK and it was just raining there all the time. So they went to Geneva thinking that they can escape from it, but then come to find out that this was a worldwide kind of cataclysmic event that was happening. So they went to Geneva to their friend Lord Byron, and same thing in Geneva. It was cloudy, it was raining all the time. And so they were just cooped up inside. So just to kind of sort of like stave off boredom, they just started telling each other ghost stories. And then eventually, like, they ran out of ghost stories to tell. So they decided to come up with their own. And that's when Mary Shelley developed Frankenstein. And that's often why you have a lot of horror classics that begin with, it was a dark and stormy night, because that was literally kind of the setting of the world at the time when one of the most iconic horror stories of all time was written. So I guess the quick side thing there. So
Yeah.
I suppose that if it were to happen where we would have like an asteroid impact, I don't know if it would be like the initial impact that would cause the mass extinction. I feel like it would set off a chain of events that would ultimately lead to it, where the planet would be rendered like almost inhabitable to a
Hmm.
degree, is how I think it would go down.
Yeah. You ever been down to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico?
Not yet. I don't know why I haven't been down to Mexico yet. I feel like it's just one of those things where, oh well, it's right there. I'm an American. I'll get to it eventually. So I usually end up kind of going a little bit further, going outward. Like I just came back from Eastern Europe. I was in Romania last week. So
Really?
yeah, so I feel like I like to go maybe just a little bit farther because I feel like I'll get to it eventually. But I feel like I actually should just go to it since it is right there.
I recommend it. I went down to the Yucatan earlier this year and it's like it's wild how many old sites and pyramids are down there, but also the cenotes, which are like the caves, which I think were created by the asteroid impact. Those are really cool too. So I strongly recommend that. But tell me about you said you were just in Romania last week?
That's right.
What were you checking out there?
Well, I've been wanting to go for a long time. It's just like when I was living in Europe, I had like a long list of places that I wanted to go to, but then of course, like, oh crap, I'm a grad student. I got to get a master's degree within a year, which is half the time it takes most people to do it. So I wasn't really able to travel to my long list of places that I wanted to go to because I got so uh, swept up in all my work and doing my degree program. So Romania, what always kind of sort of fascinated me about the place, along with like a lot of the history there too, is obviously a lot of the vampire lore that kind of came from that part of the world. I mean, and of course, like history itself sort of kind of debunks like a lot of what people may think of when they think of vampire lore. Because I mean, obviously, the classic vampire that most people think of is Dracula, and of
Mhm.
course, like when Bram Stoker wrote Dracula. Now, Bram Stoker, he's an Irish author, and he had actually never been to that part of the world. He just kind of sort of heard stories about like Vlad the Impaler and everything like that, and the setting of Wallachia and Transylvania there. And then he created Dracula, and it kind of sort of really kind of stuck out in a lot of people's minds, and they began to associate that part of the world with Dracula. And so I decided to go there kind of sort of out of intrigue from that too, and I kind of wanted to see what it was like really like. So I went to a couple of places where Vlad the Impale that is associated with Vlad the Impaler. I went to Snagov Monastery, which is Vlad Tepes's final resting place. I went to Shigiswarta, which is the city where he was born, and then I actually went to the house that he was born into and everything like that. And
Cool.
I did go to Castle, which Bran Castle is often what people depict as Dracula's castle. Well, mostly just because of the aesthetics behind it. It does kind of look like Dracula's castle, but from what I've heard, like he's never actually like stepped foot in there. But of
Mhm.
course, like it was still a really beautiful castle to see, and they did have a couple of interesting exhibits in there, kind of talking about some lore and some superstitions amongst like the Romanians of old. Like they actually did have what was called the strigoi, which is their interpretations of vampires and the undead. And they even had like some superstitions of werewolves and even like people who can control dragons and everything
Mm.
like that. So I found that to be particularly fascinating. But other than that, like, yeah, I was going to like these old fortresses that were like hundreds of years old, like up on top of these hills and overlooking the cities down below. And it was absolutely incredible. And then, of course, I went to Bucharest, and now, Bucharest for in Romania was under communist control for a long time, and I believe this it goes back to like the late '80s when the people staged rebellion to combat communism in their country. And then I actually went to the site, kind of where it all begins. They call it Kilometer Zero, and that was sort of where the people really kind of started to push back. And there was a lot of bloodshed in those streets, to ultimately kind of rid communism from that country. So definitely a lot there in that country to see. A lot that of what I wasn't expecting, and it was nice to rent a car there too. Fortunately, Romanians, they drive on the right side of the road and they have
I
their
was gonna ask.
steering wheel on the left side. Most European countries do that though. I think it's only just a small handful. I think it's just like the UK and maybe a couple of others where they drive on the left side of the road and the steering wheel's on the right side of the car. So
Yeah.
so I was fine driving there for the most
Yeah.
part.
Yeah, I was in London many years ago, and man, as an American, you don't realize how much of like I'm really used to like staying to the right. You know what I mean? I remember I was driving on a country road out there in the countryside of England, and it was just, it was one lane only, but someone's coming straight at me and we're going slow. And my instinct kicks in and I get to the right, and that guy was pissed, man.
Hmm.
He was not happy about that. So how uh how old is Vlad the Impaler's house that you visited? What year are we talking here?
Um, so his time goes all the way back to like the 1400s.
Whoa.
So I can't do math in my head this late in the evening. So
Yeah, we're
uh,
recording very late.
yeah, so obviously like well over like 600 years.
Whoa. And the house is still standing? Did you get to go inside or no?
Unfortunately, I didn't. There's like a restaurant and kind of like a small museum in there now, but it was closed when I went there, unfortunately, because I did actually go kind of during like the low season for tourists there. So unfortunately, like a lot of places like really weren't open, like in
Hmm.
like extended hours, as if like it was back in the summertime, which is Normally, the time that I usually like to go to places is during the low season. I mean, you have to contend with things like weather. Like it was pretty cold there. It was down in like the 40s and the 30s on some days. And,
Mm.
it was kind of bleak with the cloud cover. The sun didn't shine until like my last day there, but it was pretty cheap to get flights and uh lodging and the rental car. Like when it was all said and done, round trip flights, lodging for the whole trip, and the rental car with full insurance coverage for the whole trip came out to under $1,500, which
Oh,
is
wow.
don't think I've ever gotten a trip to Europe that cheap before, like ever.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna move the podcast to there.
There you go. So that's usually when I like to go is kind of during the low season, and I always recommend it to people when they want to get out and travel is to look at when the low seasons are for some countries, especially if you're more of a budget conscious traveler. Yes, you'll probably have to contend with some weather that maybe won't be the most favorable. But if you're not really a big fan of crowds like I am, because I do kind of like having these places to myself and kind of getting off the beaten path a little bit, if you will. That's usually when I like to go. I don't like going during like the summer where there's so many people there that you kind of have to like shuffle down the street, because it's so crowded.
Yeah. So, have you participated in very many archaeological like dig sites?
Oh, absolutely. When I was starting off my journey in York, as I mentioned, that's where I went to grad school. I got to take part in the excavation of this old Roman military fort. And I did find a shirt of what's called Crambeck ware. Now, Crambeck was a region in the UK when it was under like Roman occupation, and it was known for like kind of like mass producing a certain style of pottery, which they called Crambeck ware, because that's where it was manufactured. And it's a distinct style of pottery. Like if you unearth it, you can tell what it is pretty easily. And that I did end up finding a shirt of Crambeck ware. So, like I said, dating all the way back to the Romans, we're talking maybe about like third or fourth century, so close to about 2,000 years old. So,
Whoa. And you
so
said
it's
it was a shirt?
sherd, like sherd, sherd
Oh,
of
okay,
pottery
shirt.
is what we refer to it as.
I see.
And so that was kind of special for me, especially kicking off my journey and finding an artifact that old. I mean, like I said, it was only like that big. It wasn't like too significant or anything like that. But it was just kind of cool to think of like this was lost to the world for nearly 2,000 years until I found it.
That is
And
cool.
I actually had a PhD student kind of get a little bit mad at me because she was digging kind of close to me. Her entire PhD dissertation was on Crambeck ware, but she's hardly found any herself. So,
Oh man.
so for me to be digging just a couple feet from her and me finding it before she did, yeah, she wasn't too thrilled, but it was what it
How
was.
deep in the earth are you digging for things like that?
Well, it really depends on the location. Now, in archaeology, we have a thing called stratigraphy, and that is the idea is that the closest an artifact is to the ground surface, like the I guess I'll say, for lack of better terms, right now, the youngest it is, and the deeper it go, like the deeper you go, the older the things get. That's
Yeah.
why I would say, like, I don't do dinosaur bones because I don't dig that deep, because like dinosaur
Mhm.
bones would be far deeper into the ground than what anything human related might be. So, you'll have like historic artifacts. Which will probably be more closer to the surface. Prehistoric artifacts would be below them, and like I said, it really kind of depends on the region that you're at because, like, history in one location could be sooner than history in a different location. Like, if I were to be digging in, like, let's say the Middle East, like in Iraq, like trying to find prehistoric artifacts, I might have to go down a ways. Where here in the States, I probably won't have to go down that far.
Really, it's interesting. And that's because as far as we know, like in the Middle East, life was around much like it was like much older. People were there a much longer time ago, as far as we're aware, than they were in say like in the Americas.
Correct. And now, when I'm talking about history here, history is written word. So anything that is related to written word. And again, this could vary depending on different regions around the world. But like history, I guess you can say kind of sort of began in the Middle East, in ancient Mesopotamia with the invention of cuneiform, which was about 5,000 years ago. And
Okay.
ancient Mesopotamia makes up modern day Iraq. And then, of course, since then, writing has took different forms in different parts of the world, but it kind of sort of like began there with cuneiform. So like now here in the States, like we've had like our prehistory. So prehistory is anything before written word.
Okay.
And so, like here in the States, like we probably didn't really have history until like European settlers came over here and brought their writing and everything like that during contact, when they made contact with Native Americans.
Hmm.
So it really does depend. And that's kind of where I come in as an archaeologist, because when we're talking about prehistory, before any written documentation about anything that happened during that time frame, we like to look at the other material remains, and we try to get our own interpretations of what it was like for people in the past when they didn't have any written documentations of the time to tell us about what they were observing, what they were seeing, smelling, all that stuff. So so that's how we that's how we try to determine things as archaeologists based on what we
Yeah.
find.
Have you done much digging around like North America?
I sure have. I've conducted field work in over 17 states now.
Oh,
And my first stint as a professional archaeologist was actually out west in New Mexico. I was working in some of the pueblos in the Santa Fe forest, so northern New Mexico. Now, I didn't really do very much digging, as most people would think of when archaeologists do, because like out there, you get a lot of surface artifacts, especially there on top of the pueblo. So we'll just be walking around, doing what we call pedestrian survey, where we just kind of like walk in sort of like these straight lines across these pueblos and trying to see if we see anything on the surface. And typically, what this would look like would be stone flakes. So let's just say that, a group of warriors or hunters were kind of just sitting around together, and they were flint knapping stones to turn them into tools. And the flakes that they were chipping off just fell to the ground. And of course, they just kind of left them there. And so we would find like sometimes even up to like over 100 stone flakes in a single spot, and using with the type of material that was pretty common for like projectile points like arrowheads or spear points at the time. And sometimes we even found those. Like I did find a couple of arrowheads out there. And the most exciting thing that I think I've ever found actually was out in northern New Mexico. I'll tell you about that. So the most common stone that was used for tools, at least that what we found, was called chert. Very, very common out there. But every once in a while, we did come across obsidian flakes. And for anyone who's a fan of Game of Thrones would know that obsidian, they call it dragon glass in the series, and it was used to kill the White Walkers, right? So it's like this like jet black, kind of semi-translucent stone. And when you chip it just right, it is like very sharp. Like it's actually like
mhm.
so sharp that you could actually use it as a surgical scalpel. Like
Wow.
it's incredible. But that was maybe like one out of every 100 flakes would be an obsidian flake, if that. But I tell you, Jeff, this really brightened my day. This one day at work where I actually found an entire arrowhead made out of obsidian.
Dude, that's
To find
cool.
to find like an obsidian arrowhead where obsidian was already hard for us to come by, that was special to me. And I mean, it was like
It's just like sitting on the ground?
yeah, it's just sitting on the ground. Like a lot of the artifacts out there are surface artifacts, and more often than not, if anytime I do usually have to dig, it's usually more towards like the East Coast and everything like that. I think it's just maybe just like the dry, arid conditions there. I think kind of sort of preserve these things on the surface to keep them from really kind of getting buried like over time.
Yeah.
Versus like here where it's muddy, it's soggy, ground kind of shifts and everything like that. The ground can erode things a lot quicker, like especially in like some of these like more swampy areas like in Florida and Louisiana, which I've also conducted field work in. So but yeah, it's just, and I've also had a chance to work on a lot of amazing national parks. I really liked working up in Mammoth Cave, doing some stuff up there. Um,
Where's that at?
Mammoth Cave, Kentucky.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
I want to ask you about the obsidian arrowhead though.
Hmm.
How old do you suppose that was?
Let's see. Probably not quite as old as like some of the other places I've seen around Europe. I want to say this one probably might have been about 500, something like that,
500
maybe.
years old.
Yeah, and that would be my best guess right now. I mean, I'll probably have to dive a little bit more into the history of that region, and I'm sure I'll probably debunk myself at some point. But if I had to say, like right at this moment, that's probably about what I would give it.
Now you're saying you could debunk yourself. Do you think it could be older than that? You think it could be like 1,000 years old?
Possibly, I don't know if could go back that far. I would still probably give it like within like the last millennium. But I mean, now when I'm saying like I might have to debunk myself, it could be sooner than that, and it could
Hmm.
not be sooner than that. And that's one of the tough things about finding prehistoric artifacts is that there's no provenance, written like there, like there's no journals like found around these things too to tell us like oh yeah, dated this there, just sat around clocking away rocks with the boys or anything like
Yeah, but
that.
what are
So
the odds that thing's just been sitting there for 500 years? That's like mind blowing for me to think about.
yeah, I would say that maybe since this was like a higher elevation, it was on top of a pueblo, so it was up and then it was flat like at the top, and then so I'm thinking like any sort of like rainfalls probably would have eroded like the sides of this thing, where and then of course like water drainage probably just kind of like kept a lot of stuff up on top. At least that's my hypothesis.
Sure,
You
sure.
know, so but yeah,
And is this
it's
very is this super far from like where any like standard human traffic would be moving around? Like no people are going over there.
oh yeah, I was well off the beaten path, and like even getting to the place to park our truck each day was a little bit sketchy. Like I think we were going up some roads that I'm not sure if we were really supposed to go up necessarily, but
Okay.
we were, and yeah, so I would probably almost dare say that we were probably maybe like the first people to traverse this area in a long time. Now,
Wild.
and of course, like I said, I'm an archaeologist. I have a trained eye to look for these sort of things. So if we did have people that were like roaming through there at the time, maybe, the reason why these sites haven't been disturbed is because maybe they're not sure what to look for and everything
Right,
like that.
right.
And then, of course, this was a federal national forest. So there's obviously some pretty strict laws against like taking things from the forest. So
Hmm.
I'm so even if someone did come across it, I would hope that they would be deterred by, federal laws and
You
regulations
get
for
in trouble
taking
for
things.
that.
Oh yeah.
You get in big trouble for that. Now, what are the odds that someone just chucked one down and it's actually like not it's not old at all and it's a fraud? What are the chances of that?
Probably pretty minimal. I mean, someone would need to have a lot of time on their hands just to go up there and chip away at stones just for the heck of it. I mean,
Right.
I've always cracked jokes of saying, yeah, when I die, I'm going to put in my will to bury me with like, you know, I don't know, like a beer cap from the 50s and like a coin from like 2000 like 15 or something like that, just to like throw off people like there. It's like put the modern quarter like towards the bottom and then put like the 1950s beer cap above me. Just really confuse archaeologists who dig me up later.
I
Uh,
think it's a good idea. I think you should definitely do that.
so I definitely wouldn't chalk up anything that we found to be fraudulent in any sort of way. But if it was like it was a lot of effort because I did take some experimental archaeology courses when I was going for my degree, and what that entailed was actually trying to make tools ourselves as how our ancient ancestors would. And I tell you,
Not easy.
it is not as easy as I thought it would be. It's just like to make a single spear point or an arrowhead like would take hours to
Yeah,
make
they
just
were
one.
determined back then.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, back then, what else was there really for them to do? I mean, it's just like they didn't have video games and TVs and other stuff like that. It's just they would spend hours making those tools because they had to.
Hmm.
It's like you go out and you kill an animal and you bring it back, or else your family doesn't eat. So it's just so it was kind of out of necessity that they would put in that work and that they would get it right and make something that was strong enough to take down a wild beast because we had like some seriously powerful animals that roamed our country back then, and so yeah, they had to be strong and tough in order to go out there and do it.
Yeah, sorry, my internet froze a little bit, but I'm pretty sure I got you on that. Um, just making a note so I can edit that a little bit. I apologize. um, to you and to the listeners. I'm curious, do you have an opinion about, have you ever found like any like Viking stuff in North America?
Not yet. Most of the stuff that I found in the U.S., aside from what I just told you about what I found in out west, doesn't really quite go back that far. Like here on the East Coast, where I operate mostly, or at least have operated mostly throughout my career, it's mostly just been historic stuff. So maybe just going back a couple hundred years, or maybe
Got you.
even sooner than that. So nothing really Viking related yet, but I feel like I would have to go a little bit more further north in order to do that,
Yeah, you
or
probably
to
need to be
find
like,
those.
you probably need to be up like into Canada for that.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, is
Hmm.
that true though? Because I've heard rumors that, is that true that there were Vikings over there, like up in kind of like eastern East Coast Canada, like whatever that is, Newfoundland or something?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, yes, and there's definitely some Viking specialists out there for sure that could probably substantiate that. I mean, like I think the story goes, I think it was the Viking Leif Erikson, like was like one of the first to sail of the Vikings to sail to the New World, as they said it. Because like Leif Erikson was based in Greenland, and then so I think he just went out a little bit further west, and then he found his way into North America, which yeah would have been northern Canada, likely that he would have landed in.
Yeah. And it's, isn't it possible too? I know we talked about the sea levels being much higher, but isn't it possible too that there was an era when the sea levels were lower and it was maybe human beings were traveling more than we thought they were?
It's kind of hard to say. I mean, I don't I will admit I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
really know if like there was a point where it was like so low that more of the continents were exposed at the
Right.
time,
Right.
because there's a lot of instances around the world where there's entire like cities that are underwater, like completely sunken cities that used to be like coastal cities. So I don't know if there ever really was a time. Now that I think about it through that lens, I don't know if there really was a time where like sea levels like got high and they got low again. Or I guess like after like they kind of like lowered, I don't know if they got any higher. I'm not sure. So, but like we kind of started off this conversation with, like, the world kind of goes through ebbs and flows with that, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Cause then I think about like, what is it like? I don't even know where this is. Like the Easter Island heads. Like, isn't that out near like, I don't know, New Zealand or something?
No, I think Easter Island, goodness, where is it? It's off I think it's off a South American country or Central
Yeah.
American
Yeah.
country. It's it's
Yeah. I think
it's
it's,
not out in Asia. I think it's off it's either off of, which, let's see. I think it's off like the west coast of South America or the west coast of
yeah.
Central America somewhere.
I think you're right. I think it's off the west coast of South America. Um, but it's still like, how the hell did people get out there?
Yeah, well, like I said, boating technology dates back 40,000 years. I'm sure they found a way. And old like mariners of old, like they had like very like early models of how to predict tides and currents and stuff like that around certain regions and everything. It's just they sometimes they just notice that the sea kind of sort of works in patterns and everything
Yep.
like that, and they were able to kind of sort of predict certain things. And it's kind of crazy to think how like people would sail across entire oceans where all you see is nothing but water as far as the eye can see, and no fancy navigational satellite systems or anything like that. But yet they sail from place to places, delivering goods, discovering new places, setting up new colonies here and there and everything. So yeah,
You got to be ballsy to do that, man.
they figured it out.
Yeah, you got to be ballsy to do that. So I'm curious, what is the most surprising thing you've ever found?
Surprising thing. Hmm. Well, maybe I shouldn't have been too surprised to find this, but maybe it just got me really really excited. I actually did do some stuff in Civil War battlefield sites here and there, and in Vicksburg, Mississippi. So the Battle of Vicksburg took place here, and we ended up finding a Civil War bayonet that was lodged in a tree's roots. And my hypothesis is that a soldier dropped this bayonet during the war, during the battle, and the tree kind of sort of grew around it, and the roots like swallowed this bayonet whole because like just like the hilt was just sticking out from the roots, like the entire blade was swallowed up by these tree roots. I actually had to get the landscape crew to bring a chainsaw and cut the whole thing out. And then once we got it out, the blade had literally fused with the wood. And so
Whoa.
I turned it into the park's curation like that because I felt like if I tried to remove the wood from the blade was just going to crumble. Like it was in such bad shape. So I felt like I should have been expecting to find something like that, but certainly not in that way where it was literally
Yeah.
swallowed up by an entire tree. But
Nature is rad, man.
yeah, that was pretty cool though. I will say, yeah, finding a Civil War bayonet
Yeah.
lodged in a tree like that.
So you've got the you've got the Crambeck thing, the Crambeck ware. You've got the arrowhead, the obsidian arrowhead. You got the Civil War bayonet. You seem to be like a very lucky guy with your digs.
I suppose so, and I hope that that luck continues, and I find like other really fascinating things along the way. I mean, I've also found a couple of other interesting things. I mean, the obsidian arrowhead wasn't the only arrowhead I found. I found others like in Louisiana. I also found like some mini balls and other munitions from other Civil War sites, like in Virginia. So yeah, I'm still finding stuff, and I hope to find a lot more. It's I kind of started off this conversation with sometimes I feel like I was born in the wrong era because, we've already discovered so much. I always crack the joke saying I was born too late to discover the world, and I was born way too soon to discover the galaxy. So I'm kind of sort of in this sort of weird in between right now. So it's a nice thing as an archaeologist to know that there's still things left out there to be discovered, and I am discovering them as I go.
I think it's super cool, man. What do you have like your next place planned where where's your next dig happening?
Well, right now I'm kind of sort of shifting gears in my career a little bit. I'm doing a lot of what's called urban archaeology
Oh,
right now. And what that entails is that whenever there's like some development taking place, and this is done through like federal, state, and even maybe even sometimes local legislation, is that when there's an undertaking taking place where someone is like has to dig and like disturb the soil to like let's say I don't know put in like some utilities like new sewers, new electrical lines, new whatever, and they have to dig in a certain place, they would have an archaeologist present to monitor their work in case they happen to come across anything like in the ground. So that way, if they're coming across like human remains or old building foundations, or if there seems to be a lot of artifacts that are coming up out of the ground, and that's where I come in. I'm monitoring these construction workers, and then if they come across something, I kind of got to halt the work. I got to investigate, record things, take photographs, and then I coordinate with local city and, or maybe even sometimes state archaeologists and other entities to report what I found. And sometimes maybe a whole lot of people may or may not have to weigh in to make the decision as to whether or not the construction crews can either clear what I found or if it needs to be preserved in some way. But I'm kind of like the eyes on the ground, the I don't want to use the term first responder necessarily, but I'm the one there that kind of makes the initial discovery and kind of run it up the chain of command, if you will.
interesting. Have you already begun this work or you're just now pivoting towards it?
I've been doing this type of work for about 6 months now, so
Okay.
it's a little bit more stability in my career now because when I first started off, and this is kind of a hard thing for a lot of archaeologists, is that there's a lot of travel involved, which is, fine. It was fine for a while because obviously I am a traveler. I do like going to and seeing like new places. But if you are trying to have like somewhat of a semblance of a life for yourself, like this line of work can affect things like relationships and, time away from family and everything like that. Like for a while, my travel schedule was 10 days traveling to do field work and only 4 days at home. And
Oh.
so it's just like, I was in a relationship for a time, but of course she broke things off with me because she just couldn't handle with the fact that I was, gone all the time. And of course, it's
Mhm.
not like I'm not in the military anymore. So it's not like I'm leaving for an extended period of time to, go hunt terrorists on foreign battlefields so they don't come here to try to wreak havoc on our way of life or anything. I'm just going to dig in the dirt, for all intents and purposes. Um, but now this is kind of sort of like I'm now at a point in my career where it's just I go to work each day. I come home at the end of the day. I get to sleep in my own bed instead of in a crappy hotel room somewhere, and I have more stability now, if you
Yeah,
will. So
yeah.
it's kind of a point in the career of an archaeologist that a lot of people will strive to get to, but
Mhm.
I'm kind of just sort of just now getting to it.
Got you. And have you, I know you've only been doing the urban thing for like 6 months, but have you come across anything really cool in your time doing that?
Well, mostly just a couple of historical stuff. Like we did find these old foundations that were made out of like yellow brick, which was kind of unusual. I don't come across like yellow brick on any historic structures at least up to this point. And there were a lot of artifacts that came along with it too. There was a lot of like old glass bottles, a couple of old like what we call whiteware and plateware and stuff like that. And then there
Mhm.
was also a lot of cut bones too, which kind of made me a little bit worrisome at first because there we actually do have a specialized field called osteoarchaeologists where osteoarchaeologists just do nothing but study bones, and so they can look at a bone and know right away whether it's a human or it's an animal, and they could whittle it down to what kind of animal it is. And typically some will get so into it where they're using like the Latin phrases for the animal it is, and I'm like, can you just say it was a cow?
Yeah.
So um but fortunately, we come to find out that all these bones were animal bones, and they were actually cut. You can actually see like the precision, like saw marks, like on the side of the bones. And we also had some historic maps, and this was kind of helpful. Some historic maps showing that this spot where we were digging, where we found all this stuff, was the site of an old butcher shop from about 100 years ago.
Cool.
So clearly, this was like maybe the butcher had these materials in his shop, and then of course he just discarded the bones, probably in like a separate trash heap, and then just everything was just kind of buried as like the city developed over time, and we
Yeah.
just happened to come across it. So that was kind of interesting this time around, like actually having historic maps to refer to. And course correlating it with what we were finding in the ground. So this was kind of like history and archaeology kind of working in unison to kind of make greater interpretations like of the past.
Fascinating stuff. You ever come across anything paranormal or anything super weird?
Um, Actually, it's funny that you asked that because just this past weekend, I actually take part in my first paranormal investigation
Oh,
here in San Antonio at the Black Swan Inn, which is a very haunted location. Now I was walking through the main house. I think I would refer to it more as a manor, actually. So I was walking through the manor, and there was this room that they refer to as the seance room. And
okay.
there was a doll in a glass case. And now,
Creepy.
typically, when it comes to like cursed objects like dolls, like there's some out there. There's like one in Florida. I can't remember what it was called, but for that doll, the way the legend goes is that before you take a picture of this doll, you actually have to ask its permission first before you take its photo. Because if you take its photo without asking first, then like a lot of bad luck and misfortune was meant to
You're
follow
cursed.
you. Yeah, a cursed object. And then and this doll was encased in glass, and I guess apparently like glass is kind of sort of a way to contain the curse, and
Okay.
everything like that.
Makes sense.
So but I was still just because that was in my head, I was reluctant to take a photo of this doll. So unfortunately, I don't
I
have
wouldn't.
it. I wouldn't have it to show because, I mean, normally when it comes to like superstitions and the paranormal, I'm fascinated by those for sure. And but I think there was still kind of a part of me, like something just in me just said, don't do it. Like, don't take a picture of the doll. Even if you did ask for permission, just don't do it. And part of the investigation actually took place in the seance room that night. And let's just say, Jeff, I actually experienced some things. Um,
Really?
yeah, so like a couple of the people there, we had like at least one that I know of that was a psychic, and some of the other people had took part in other investigations before. So they had like someone had like an app on their phone which is supposed to like pick up electromagnetic waves and like translate them into words that probably of like because I guess how it sort of works is that ghosts are on a different electromagnetic frequency and electronic devices can pick them up better. They call them EVPs, electronic voice phenomenon. And this was supposed to like put it into words what it supposedly picks up from these frequencies. So it's like you ask a question, and if the ghost responds, this device, this app is supposed to pick it up.
Mhm.
And so we were trying to talk to like the spirits of the house, and I kid you not, and I know this is kind of cliche because it comes up in horror movies and stuff like that, but the room actually did get colder. Like
Oh, weird.
I actually like felt it like on my legs first and on my arms, like my arms were under the table. I actually felt it get colder there. And I thought maybe it was just me, but then suddenly everyone else that was sitting around the table with me, they all said they started feeling cold too.
Whoa.
And there was another instance where like my face, my shoulders and like my upper arms just started tingling. Like there was this really intense like tingling sensation. And
Uh-huh.
again, maybe I thought it was just me, but then everyone else said they started feeling it too. They're like, okay, my face is feeling flush, my face is feeling tingly and everything like that. And I'm like, what in the heck is going on here? So and then the psychic that was kind of sort of leading my group in the investigation there, um, she wanted me to start asking more questions because she felt like the ghosts were actually resonating with my questions.
Hmm.
Like I asked a question, and then the app, the words that came up said, "I like talking to you."
Oh,
And
okay.
so she says, "Okay, the ghost obviously favors you, Josh. So you go ahead and start asking questions."
What kind of
And
stuff were you asking?
I asked like just plainly like are you buried here? And then it said yes. And I'm like, well, where are you buried? And then the word that came up next was cabinet. And so I'm like, is the cabinet in this room? And I didn't get a response, but I was kind of trying to see, can I find out where this person was buried and
Yeah.
everything. So
What if they got murdered or something?
you know, and that's sometimes like what I wonder too. It was like and I think one of the responses were, and I got the audio recording of the whole session. So I'll have to go back and kind of like review some of the stuff that I asked. But I think like there was a response that said something to the effect of he was never found, or he was never, or he didn't pay or something like that. So it would sounds like someone was murdered and the killer kind of got away with it potentially.
Wow. So what
So
was this ghost hunting trip for your archaeological work or just for personal stuff or was it for your podcast?
mostly personal. Now, the people who hosted it was the Paranormal Research Society. Ryan Buell, back in the early 2000s, he actually had his own show called Paranormal State when he was a student at Penn State, and he would go around to different places with to do paranormal investigations to try to see if he could help people that were experiencing hauntings in their homes and
Yeah.
everything like that. And he moved to San Antonio about 2 years ago, and mostly just kind of doing like speaking stuff. But he hosted this event for just like a small handful of us. So I knew I had to take part once I learned that this was happening because it's like one of those things that's always been kind of curious to me, but at the same time, there's been plenty of haunted places that I've seen, like especially when I was living in England and everything. There was this one house in York that was called the Plague House. Apparently, like there was like a young family living there, husband, wife, and their little girl. Both parents died from the plague, and in order to risk like kind of containing them, they actually locked the little girl in her house with her dead parents, and then
Oh,
the girl ended up dying. And to this day, some people claim that they see like the ghost of a little girl on the up in the upstairs window, banging on the window, trying to get help from someone below to let her out. And so that house was actually on my walk home. And during the fall and the winter time in the UK, the sun sets very early. It sets at like 4:30, so it's completely dark. And a lot of businesses are privately owned and they don't stay open past 5. So you'll be walking through the city center at like 5:30 at night. It's completely dark and no one's there because everything's closed. It's kind of weird and it was kind of creepy at the same time. So I would stand outside this house, Jeff, just out of curiosity, thinking maybe the ghost of the little girl will appear in the window and I can actually get a chance to see a ghost. But
Yeah.
then another part of me also says, if I actually do see a ghost and have irrefutable proof, at least to myself, that ghosts are real, can I ever unsee something like that? Like, can I actually just like go home and crawl into bed knowing with what I just saw and be able to like sleep soundly, you know? So,
Yeah.
but still though, it's just there's a fascination there, and you know, I've talked to a couple of other paranormal investigators. I had one on my podcast, and just hearing stories about how she grew up with a ghost that stalked her when she was a little girl, and it's just it's just there's so many stories out there, and so
So
I kind of
you
want to experience it for myself.
you never saw the girl in the window?
No.
You didn't hang around long enough. It sounds like you were like, I don't know if I want to.
Yeah, I don't know. And of course, like I was kind of tired from a day of academic studies anyway, so I kind of wanted to get home. But so I would hang around for like a few minutes, but then
Yeah.
eventually, yeah, I think like that idea was just like, I don't know if I actually really do like want to see a ghost. So
Well, I think when you were at the seance room, I think the ghosts may have liked you because you've been to all these historical sites and they can probably sense that you're kind of like tapped in with that like historical energy, especially, in the countryside in England, there's definitely ghosts out there, in my opinion. So I wonder if the ghosts, they like your questions, but they could also kind of sense your energy.
well, and also I would probably say like depending around the time when the ghost died, they may have like if different attitudes towards like perhaps a man asking questions or maybe even women asking questions because
Sure, sure.
like there was actually one response on the device that said I'm from the 1800s. And so, like, someone who from like the 1800s, like, let's say if this is the ghost of a man from the 1800s, different times back then. So he would probably be more in favor to speaking to men and probably wouldn't like being able to speak women or having women ask him questions
Yeah, he's
necessarily.
probably a little bit of a sexist ghost. I believe that,
Yeah,
You can't, I mean, this was how the times were when he was around. I get that.
probably and we also did like part of the investigation was another part on the property that they called the barn. And we were in there, and there was a ghost that came in there that seemed to have like a thing against women. Like the group that I was with consisted mostly of women. There was maybe like about 7 women and 3 men. And
Hmm.
the women were all kind of just describing like just this heavy feeling like inside like the barn, and
Whoa.
like what they were experiencing I wasn't necessarily experiencing, like. And
Wow.
so the way the psychic kind of described where she said that the ghost wants to feel big like around the women, like as if the ghost is looking down on them, kind of
Yeah.
sorta,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
everything like that. So and that was also I had a similar story from this paranormal investigator that I had come on my podcast when she was growing up in a haunted house in Southern California. This ghost like had a thing for women and was stalking women. Like her father never experienced anything, but her and her mother did. And
Interesting.
so I guess that could be it. That's definitely a thing where like certain ghosts, especially what they call intellectual hauntings, where spirits can actually kind of sort of communicate and have a good sense of awareness. Sometimes they may be more keen to a particular gender than the other.
So my mom told me that she saw a ghost once. And this was before I was born. And I asked her because I'm into this kind of stuff. I think it's real, but I haven't seen it yet. I think if I see it, I'll be freaked out and scared. But I asked my mom if she ever saw a ghost, and she was living in Virginia. I think they were in Norfolk, and I wasn't born yet. And my dad was in the military, so he would be gone for a long time, and she'd be home alone. And she said she could sense the presence of a woman in the room with her. And she said that she saw her a couple times floating up in the corner, but she usually didn't see her. She saw her a couple times, but she could more like sense that she was there. And the feeling that she got was that she was like a protective ghost. It was a female who was like nice to my mom, nice to the other woman in the house. And my mom told my dad about it when he came back from wherever he was in the world. I can't remember that part of the story. But he came back, and now my dad never saw the ghost. Um, However, he there were weird things that would happen in the house, like cabinets would kind of open and shut for no reason, and stuff would fall off the wall for no reason. Which is weird because my mom said she was a friendly ghost, and that seems kind of creepy and scary. But so there was stuff like that, and then my dad tells me this was the part of the story that locked it in for me. He goes, "Yeah, so the mailman once told me I was out at the mailbox, and the mailman says, 'Hey, you ever have anything weird happen in that house?'" And my dad goes, "Yeah, like sometimes plates will fall and cabinets will open and stuff for no reason." And the mailman said that there was a woman who was murdered in there in the house by her husband. And my dad said, he goes, "I never told your mom what the mailman said until we moved out of there." He goes, "I didn't want to freak her out any further and confirm or deny the story. So once we moved, then I told her that the mailman said, yeah, there was a woman killed in there." So I think my mom did see that ghost, but my mom said it was like a protective ghost. She said it was a very protective energy. So yeah, man, I think they're real.
Yeah, it's interesting, like how, and another a term I've heard among some paranormal investigators is residual hauntings, where just like if something very very terrible happens like in certain places, it kind of sort of like leaves like an imprint like on the structure in and of itself. Like you
Mhm.
hear this about like the Gettysburg battlefield, where like some people would claim they walked the grounds at night and they could actually like hear and see soldiers like still fighting, just like all that negative energy just kind of leaves an imprint there. And
Yep.
I felt something similar when I was in Andersonville, Georgia. I did do some archaeological field work there, but Andersonville was the site of a very, very notorious prisoner of war camp, and it was an open air prison. And just like if, from what I've heard from some historical documentation, it's just like as soon as like prisoners like walked through the gates in there, they it looked like they were walking into hell, just
Whoa.
because it's an open air prison. You got all these men just shoved in there. There's just like a small like creek kind of towards like the center of it to draw water from. But oftentimes like this water carried like parasites and of course like the unsanitary conditions there too. So there was a lot of disease. And then there was of course starvation, exposure, and there was this perimeter kind of close to the walls that they called the deadline. And if any one of these prisoners just to step a hair past that deadline, they would be shot on sight from guards watching on top of the walls. So just a horrible, horrible place. Like so much death and anguish in
Yeah,
that one
and like a
spot.
lot of a lot of suffering and a lot of fear.
Hmm.
And it's like the fear and suffering leaves an if there's so much of it, it leaves an imprint on the location.
Yeah, and so like just walking those grounds though, Jeff, the best I can describe is that it just felt so heavy. Like I felt like my knees just were gonna like buckle beneath me and everything. Cause it's just, yeah, like you said, so much suffering in that one spot too. And there was only one other place that I've been to where I've had a similar feeling, and that was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And that was the site where Jesus was crucified. And
Whoa.
and I felt like the same kind of heavy feeling in there too. So
Wow. Wow. Man, I feel like we could do a whole other hour on like paranormal stuff. But it is getting late, so I'm wondering, can you share with the audience? Tell us a little bit about your podcast. Where can people find you, and what are you talking about over on your show?
yeah, so I'm the host of the All Around Adventure podcast, and my show has kind of sort of evolved a little bit since I started it about 6 years ago. Originally, it kind of sort of started as like just a travel blog, All Around Adventure. That's what it was a travel blog. Blogging was a big thing at the time. However, I found that I was much more comfortable speaking in front of a microphone than I was actually like writing stuff. Like even in grad school, like I scored so much higher on my oral presentations than my written reports. So I think that was probably an indication that maybe I should start a podcast with this too. And it began just as me sharing my own travel and adventure stories, and then eventually I got other travelers to come on my show. But I've kind of come to find that like finding adventure and living an adventurous life. Yes, travel is certainly an element to that, but I really kind of just wanted to focus. I shifted my focus to like the adventure of life itself. Like, yes, traveling can definitely give you some adventures, but for some, having an adventure would be just maybe going to the gym for the first time when they felt uncomfortable of going to the gym, or going on the jujitsu mat even though they were probably worried about getting themselves in a chokehold or in an armbar or something like that. And so I'm just talking to all these people who are just crushing it in life, having these amazing adventures, pushing boundaries, taking risks, and everything like that. And just what have they learned along the way? Like, what sort of life lessons have they taken and implemented into their lives in order to lead to their success in the adventures that they sought out? So, I've had a couple of number one New York Times best-selling authors come on. I had Jack Carr. I've
Nice.
had Brad Thor and Don Bentley, Kyle Mills. I've had a couple of world first record holders that have done like world first expeditions. I even had a guy that got kidnapped in Bangladesh once. That was an interesting story. So,
Whoa, that sounds cool.
yeah, and then also like every October, I try to do like a spooky theme for the month of Halloween because it's my favorite holiday. So, like I said, I've had a paranormal investigator. I've also had like a death scholar, as I like to call her, come on who manages a cemetery out in England. So just a whole wide array of amazing people who are having incredible adventures throughout life that I'm bringing on the show. And so, yeah, that's the all around adventure. And, it's wherever you can find a podcast, like wherever someone's listening to this episode, they can find my podcast on the same platform. I'm also on YouTube, and I'm most active on Instagram. If anyone wants to connect with me over there, it's just all around adventure, one word, no dashes. And yeah, that's my show.
Cool, my friend. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. I'd love to have you back one day and we'll do like another hour all about ghosts and stuff. But
Yeah, by all means, it was an amazing experience, and it's definitely something that I would love to talk more about. And then also, it's just like again with me get into the realms of art as an archaeologist. I'm sure I could bring up a lot about different cultures around the world and what their lore looked like and what their superstitions and their belief were. It can get pretty in depth for sure.
yeah, amazing. Well, thanks for coming on and we'll leave it there and bye everyone.